Welcome to the Millionaire University podcast. I'm your host, Brien Gearin, with you today. And on this edition of the MU Pod, I'm joined by Dr. Ryan Williamson. He is a founder of Transcend Health, where his expertise lies in optimizing brain health and cognitive performance, especially for entrepreneurs and high performers. He is also a Navy veteran. Ryan, welcome to the show. And as always, we super appreciate your service to our country.
Thank you, Brien. It's an honor to be here, and I appreciate the kind words.
Absolutely, man. I'm so excited to have you on here. You were introduced to me through a mutual friend of ours, and when I read the little blurb in the intro, I got really excited because, we typically have on entrepreneurs who we talk about their business, how they started, how they grew it, their margins, their people, hiring, you name it. But we also have entrepreneurs such as yourself, where we're going to talk about more of a subject matter. You're the expert in the subject matter we're going to have here today, and you are. Really going to be, I should say, I'm really excited because we're talking about intentional, healthy living, and getting it from a doctor who is a board certified neurologist who's going to help us unlock these different keys in our brains and in our mental to really live the life that we as entrepreneurs want to live. We get into business for a multitude of reasons, but for the most part, it's to live a life of freedom and of wealth and all sorts of facets in our life. But mindset plays such a huge role. So I'm spoiling the intro here. Ryan, I want you to start talking instead of me. First of all, let's hear a little bit of your origin story. Let's get a little bit of context about who you are and how you got to where you are. And then we're going to dive right into intentional, healthy living.
Of course. So yeah, quick backstory. I think like most people that end up in healthcare, I suffered a fair amount of loss when I was younger, and that got some gears turning. And when I say loss, I mean just lost some family members I was close with, and so that drove me into medicine. So I mean, it takes quite a while to get through all the training. So I knew it was going to be a long pipeline, but glad I did. Very fulfilling. Ultimately became a neurologist. Wanted to serve in the military, so I took a scholarship through the Navy, and so the Navy paid for medical school. And after I graduated and finished my active duty commitment, got out in 2022. And while in the service, most of our patients are by definition healthy, right? These are active duty men and women who are in excellent shape. And so I'm seeing things like migraines and peripheral nerve injuries and just things that are pretty treatable to get people back on the battlefield. And it wasn't until really I got out in 2022 that I went back to travel medicine and started seeing more civilians and older adults that were suffering from just all of these preventable conditions. So, I mean, I'm making diagnoses of dementia and Alzheimer's being the most common. I see strokes all the time, multiple strokes a day that I've got to, run around, put out fires, try to help people with heart attacks, brain death, horrible neurologic injuries. And it quite frankly it's very sad to do that day in and day out, and you feel very helpless. And part of the helplessness, as I'm reflecting back on what these people are dealing with, is the stroke or the diagnosis of dementia is kind of the big event, right? That people go, oh my gosh, how did this happen? But when you look back at the course of someone's life, I mean, this is 20, 30, maybe 40 years in the making, with these chronic diseases that slowly smolder and cause these changes that happen in our bodies that elevate our risk of ultimately developing a diagnosis or being in one of these emergencies. And so I started thinking about that and said, well, how can we help rewind the clock and stop this stuff earlier and educate more people earlier on how to take better care of themselves and adopt a healthy, intentional lifestyle, as you so eloquently stated. And that led me down this rabbit hole of looking at the literature and saying, man, I just need to do something about this. So I wanted to write a book and had one outlined and reached out to a good friend of mine, Amber Vilhauer, who's a mutual connection through Mike Abramowitz, who you mentioned. And she said, yeah, let's go write the book. Sounds great. And this was June 10th. Sorry, I emailed her on June 7th of last year. These dates are relevant. Amber responds June 11th and said, let's do the book. Let's go help you create a business, get this word out to everybody. And Brien, on June 10th, my lifelong best friend died unexpectedly. It was a total accident, had nothing to do with chronic health issues like I'm talking about in the hospital. But that was the single worst thing I've ever been through, and in spite of the handful of relatives that I lost when I was younger. But it triggered this deep reflection, and I'd already committed to to moving forward with the book and to changing my practice and trying to scale and help more people. But man, it was such a wake up that you just never know. And you get one life, and we've got this opportunity to just go be the best versions of ourselves. And I mean, it's not always guaranteed. And I want to help people find that. Um,
I love that. I mean, you mentioned the fact that when you kind of got back to, I guess, civilian doctoring, if you will, where you just saw all these preventable diseases and afflictions that, as a doctor, you must feel helpless. Where you're like, come on, like this, most of this is preventable. Like, what happened? Where did the rubber not meet the road at some point in so many people's lives? And I love that, and I'm not a doctor. I haven't known many very closely in my history, but I can imagine for many, it's a very lonely and dispiriting path where, and I don't mean to bash the doctor, but it's, you see so much things where you're just like you said, constantly putting out fires, and it feels like everything's just totally on fire and there's nothing you can do about it. So I think it's just awesome that you have decided to open your own business, Transcend Health, to try and change these things for people today before they're 50, 60, 70, 80 years old and struggling with all these things that perhaps were a result of lifestyle choices in their earlier years. Speaking as an entrepreneur myself, I'm going to be 35 this year. There are health changes that I've made in the past few years have been great, but as a father of four, an owner in two businesses, like I struggle myself to stay on top of my exercise and to stay on top of eating healthy and all of the above, right? Knowing that some point down the line, I hope that I don't have these regrets, right? So I want to talk about more, we mentioned intentional healthy living, and how you specialize in, a few of the things you've mentioned before are reducing brain fog, improving decision-making, sustaining long-term mental clarity. There's a lot of different things that go into this. So let's start from the top. When you started Transcend Health, what was your first goal? What was the first thing that you were going to attack to help prevent some of the issues that you were noticing as a doctor?
yes. And a quick comment back to doctors feeling kind of disheartened or disenfranchised or whatever you want to say. Medical training is very siloed. And what I mean by that is that we all get the same kind of basic education about the body, but then we all go into our respective residencies and then what are called fellowships, which is a subspecialty training past residency. And so you look at my field like neurology, not only are we just dealing with issues of the nervous system, but 97% of adult neurology graduates go on to do a fellowship where they're just dealing with strokes or headaches or peripheral nerve disorders or whatever. So, I mean, and you've got that in every field, in cardiology and surgery. So people just, all they care about is their little sliver of a corner of the body. And they're not thinking in terms of systems or the macro view. And, I mean, maybe it's gratifying to cut a tumor out, but the way I think about it is, why did that end up there in the first place? And how can we prevent these kinds of things from happening? So that's not taught in medical school. And that's a whole nother conversation, but I'm optimistic about where we're headed in terms of AI and technology. And I think we're going to see a much more integrative, available level of service for people to have better and more continuous monitoring on preventive issues. But we're in this gap right now where we've got to have more stuff like this. Anyway, side note, but back to your question. What I see every day, and this is in the entrepreneurial communities that I'm in, this is among my physician colleagues, this is patients at the hospital, this is everywhere, is that I feel like people are just stuck in this funk and this fog. And I mean, I'm just observe this in your day-to-day interactions. You're going to the bank, the gas station, the grocery store, wherever. Watch how many people have rounded shoulders, they're looking down, or they're glued to their phone. They don't smile. You open the door for them and you say, hey, here you are. How you doing? And they just go, And they don't. They're just the level of disengagement, and I think lack of mental and physical health is alarming to me, quite frankly. And there are reasons, I think, that this unfortunately has come to be. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with where we've ended up as a culture. And what I mean by that is that the society that we're thrown into when we're born is not how we evolved and not designed for our optimal functioning, the way our brains and our bodies work. take this example, right? We are constantly stimulated by screens and artificial light. Here we are communicating from Georgia to Cincinnati, right? And over a
Hmm.
screen and a high definition internet connection, and I've got artificial lights, and crazy that we can do this, but there's an opportunity cost because your brain. I mean, the amount of information that you and I are exposed to in, I don't know, 30 minutes or an hour is probably more than our ancestors would have gotten in a week or a month, right? I mean,
Hmm.
it's that much, and your brain is not designed to handle all of that on such a rapid fire basis. And you throw that on with the fact that we don't move. We wake up to, again, artificial alarms and phones. We stress to get to work on time, to a job that most people maybe don't enjoy or aren't fulfilled by, and hence entrepreneurs kind of getting out of that a little bit by creating what their view of happiness through their business. But then you sit all day in an office, and you come home and you sit again, and you sit at dinner with your family, and you sit watching Netflix. You're not moving. You're not eating the right stuff. You're stressed. You're eating the processed food. So this is a broken system. Yet we accept it as normal because I think most people just don't know any differently, because that's just what we're thrown into. And so my aim is to help really just peel off the horse blinders and help people look up and go, hey,
Hmm.
this is why you're feeling this way, or you appear this way for a handful of reasons that are not your fault. And to get people to wake up to, oh gosh, like, yeah, maybe I would feel better if I knew these things, or I could help change these things. And as it turns out, again, we just are designed to work in a certain way. And I'm happy to dive into that. But that's kind of that's my observation. That's sort of the baseline of where I think most people sit.
Okay, so help us understand. You work with the entrepreneurial community. There's a lot of unique things as an entrepreneur that affect us, that affect our mental on a regular basis. I guess, what are the types of clients you work with? How do you work with them? And what are the things, how do you address what their issues are when it comes to everything we've outlined already?
Yes. So average client. So if I have a private client, for example, these are typically high performing small business owners, entrepreneurs, very busy, high demand, high pressure, very intelligent, and they're just under this constant barrage of stress from all angles. And it's multiple businesses, it's investments, it's family, it's commitments, it's kids, it's all of it, right? And what a wonderful set of problems to have, but it can be very heavy and very overwhelming. And so what I try to do is get people to think about, again, let's take an example of how your brain works. So I like to think of two basic structures in the brain. There's one called the prefrontal cortex. It's kind of a mouthful, but if you just think about the spot right behind your forehead, right? That's where that thing is. That's the most recently evolved, most eloquent, most complex part of our brain that separates us from higher order animals. And it allows you to think and plan and design businesses and all the abstract thought that we have the privilege of using, but also keeps you in that focused, calm, collected state, sort of flow state as an entrepreneur, right? That's what we want to be using and optimally taking advantage of. The opposite to that is something called the amygdala. And the amygdala is this little almond shaped structure deeper in the brain. You've got two of them, there's one on each side, but that's your fear center. And when the reason I describe both of these is they're then in many ways they're polar opposites. And when you are in the middle of an acute stressor, so a deadline's coming up, new projects due, you're closing on a new deal. Well, I mean, just insert crisis here, right? The connections to your prefrontal cortex are temporarily knocked offline, and the connections to the fear center, the amygdala, are boosted up. And in the moment, at best, you can't think and you can only react. And you're stressed, and you're kind of helpless in a way, and not proactively doing things that you need to, and serving or working in your highest and best state. And that's just in the moment. Chronically, which again, back to this sort of unideal or suboptimal lifestyle that we live, all of these different pieces chip away at those connections. And so over time, because your brain can rewire itself, and this works in both directions, by the way, but you rewire away from the frontal lobe. And so those connections are weakened. And even over time, with elevated levels of cortisol, which is a big stress hormone that kind of comes along with this whole pathway, the cortex, the gray matter, which is where the cells live in that prefrontal cortex, actually shrink and they thin. And the connections to the amygdala are upregulated. So I know this is a lot of science talk, so I hope you're hanging with me
I
and your
love it.
audience staying with me on this. But over time, so it's not just an in the moment thing, but over time, the more stress you undergo, the more your brain learns, oh, this is how it's going to be. And so you're not going to be able to perform as well over time. So your brain is training to do the wrong thing. And part of what I try to do is help educate people to A, understand that, and then B, learn the lifestyle, learn the techniques that help retrain your brain to regain that control.
So could this be when we talk about a scarcity mindset versus an abundance mindset? I've been an entrepreneur for going on 8 years now, and it took me a long time to shift my mindset from that of scarcity and fear and stress. Not to say that I don't have stressors or fears anymore, but over the past few years, I've noticed in myself that living in a more in a position of abundance, um, I feel like in my head, like things have opened up. So is there actual um, scientific proof that what you just explained, where your prefrontal cortex is getting weaker because you're living in this state of stress? Could we pair that with that's a scarcity mindset? When we've all met somebody who they're just the world is always falling, like catastrophizing, they seem perpetually stressed out. And to me, when I see that, I think that person's in a scarcity mindset. So that's like a physical change. Is that accurate?
Yes, yes. So the anything, any feeling, any sensation, any thought, anything you experience is due to a physical, neurochemical, or mechanical connection in your brain, right? I mean, it's pretty amazing, but you have about 11 million bits of information per second that enter through your nervous system, which is pretty wild. That enter into your brain anyway. You can only process a small fraction of that. And for what it's worth, about 10 million bits of that is through your vision. So your eyes are actually quite important, which is why people that are visually impaired is such a debility or disability. But in either case, your brain is constantly exposed to all this information. And it's this just supercomputer, super processor that has to make sense of what's happening. And yes, so there are complex social, environmental, and genetic reasons for all of this. But if somebody is in a constant fear state like that, or a scarcity mindset, now that's often a learned behavior, right? I mean, I grew up in a family like that where my parents taught me to save and everything was, I mean, we can go through that whole thing, right? I think
Hmm.
your audience probably knows scarcity mindset versus abundance. And like you, I have had to learn the abundance mindset as well. But by doing so, by opening and expanding that vision, by living in a state of gratitude, all of those things independently help increase those prefrontal connections and shrink those amygdala connections and make you more resilient to stress. And that's another way that I would maybe think about it too. If you think about, so what other interventions that have become popular in recent years, like cold plunge or sauna, different types of exercise, those are actually stressors to your body, and they create physical and, again, neurochemical changes in your body and your brain that allow you to be more resilient, right? So I don't know, if you've done a cold plunge, if you done one of these.
I've been in cold water before, but that's like when the hot water heater blew out and I just took a really cold shower. So I'm going to have to say no, I have not done a cold plunge, though I know a lot of entrepreneurs who have, and they swear by it.
So the data, I mean, to be clear, the data for exercise and sauna, in my opinion, are much more substantial than cold plunge for longevity and all cause mortality and things like this. We can jump into that
Interesting.
in a minute if you'd like. But cold plunge is fantastic for mood. And one of the reasons for this is that when you jump into this, I don't know, whatever, 35, 40-degree water, pick a temperature for a couple minutes, you are shocking your body. And this results in a release of different types of neurotransmitters like dopamine and norepinephrine, and you get through it. But again, part of the idea is that you are intentionally exposing your body to a controlled dose of a stressor that then blunts the stress response later on. So it's kind of like going to the gym for your brain in a way. And that type of stress is called a hormetic stress or a hormesis, meaning that a small controlled dose is actually quite beneficial, but prolonged exposure can be harmful. I mean, for example, if somebody sat in frigid water for an extended period of time, that could cause hypothermia, that could kill somebody. So can be a very dangerous thing. And unfortunately, there have been cases of things like this reported. But anyway, a bit of a tangent there, but, but the idea is that we want to be thinking about activities we can take that boost that connection to the prefrontal cortex, that keep us in that grateful, abundant, productive, healthy mindset. And there's just, I mean, there are a whole bunch of these that we can look at, from different types of exercise to proper sleep to proper nutrition to stress management. I mean, on and on and on.
Yeah. So walk me through what do you typically see in your clients or entrepreneurs who are in the thick of it, right? They're in the thick of it. They've got all the things going on. Walk me through the main things that you see that are really affecting their life and their performance. And then let's walk through like some of those examples you just gave. How do you treat them, or how do you help them overcome these things to become the high performers that they truly want and can be?
So for starters, 93% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy, period. And that entrepreneurs are in that camp too. And when I say metabolically unhealthy, that means that we do not have optimal parameters of at least one of the following, and that's blood pressure, fasting blood sugar, or blood glucose levels, our body mass index, or how much we weigh, in particular central obesity, which is some of that visceral fat, if you hear people talk about that, and then optimal levels of cholesterol or triglycerides or fats in the bloodstream. And why is that all important? Well, it's not just for your doctor to check a bunch of labs and shake his finger at you once a year or whatever, right? And so you need to get control over this, Brien, or you got to eat more salad or whatever. These measurements matter. And if somebody has 3 or more of these, they have a term called metabolic syndrome. And metabolic syndrome can lead to problems like insulin resistance, which can lead to problems like diabetes, high blood pressure, by definition is something called hypertension. I mean, high cholesterol. So all of these play into these risk factors that can turn into chronic diseases. And these are the changes I referenced earlier when I said, when I started seeing all these patients with dementia and strokes and everybody that come into the hospital. This doesn't happen overnight. I mean, this is literally a decades-long process where by not adhering to the right lifestyle, there are microscopic and subcellular changes that happen in the body that over years that are silent. I mean, people don't, you don't wake up one day and go, oh, geez, my Alzheimer's protein is up 3%, right? There's no feedback or no gauge in your brain, right, that you can use to determine that. It just happens without you knowing it or you being able to feel it. And that's a problem. And so when it comes to the entrepreneur, to get back to your question, this is going on in most people. And in particular, in somebody who's so busy and so driven and has so many commitments and priorities and goals, health often gets pushed to the back burner, right? We all live in this hustle culture where it's in a way kind of glorified to really burn the candle at both ends and start that next business and piece it all together. And, it's invigorating. I get it. But, when you're closer to our age, I mean, if you're in your mid to, I don't know, late 30s, okay, maybe you can pull that off if you're in decent health. But I'm telling you that this catches up with people very soon. And how much, again, I mean, the joke is every decade or so, people are like, oh, I wish I were your age. I mean, if you and I were in our 20s, I mean, I mean, well, I'll spare you my med school stories, but I used to do things I wouldn't do now, and I could still wake up and study for 10, 12 hours a day and go hit the gym and whatever, right?
Yep.
So anyway,
Right there with you.
days are over, but there's no way I could even, come close to that now. And these things matter because your body changes and you've got to take care of yourself and you've got to make health a priority, because without your health, I mean, put it this way, I think people need to ask themselves, especially entrepreneurs, like, what are you doing this for? Like, why does this all matter? I mean, why are you hustling so hard? Why are you grinding? Why are you going after this business? And, it might be okay, yeah, to provide for me or my family, or I've got a great idea, great product. But at the end of that road, when you get there and you finally build the thing and it's out there in the world, are you going to be there to enjoy it?
Right.
Right.
Or
I mean,
do you have a quality of life that allows you to do so?
yes. And I unfortunately see this time and time again where, I mean, again, these are brilliant, successful, capable people, but they just ignore their health. And again, then one of these crises shows up. I mean, there's a life-ending heart attack and a sudden cardiac death, or they get diagnosed with ALS or some horrible thing. I mean, there's just, you've got to prioritize your health. And I mean, there's an old adage that says something like, the healthy person has 1,000 wishes and the sick person has one, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's so true. And I hope I'm answering your question. I keep going on these tangents, Brien.
No, this is great. Well, this leads me to my next question is, the macro question is, how do you prioritize your health? But I am curious about some of the actual tactics that you can use to improve your health. But at that macro level, how do you prioritize your health? If I'll use just my experience as an example. I'm a father of 4, all under age of 7. My oldest child has special needs, a severe neurological disorder. I'm a partner at Millionaire University. I own my own marketing company. I'm a T-ball coach. I'm on a couple different boards. I've got all these different things going. And I'm also a type 1 diabetic. So I have to prioritize my health. That doesn't mean that I do it perfectly every week or every day. But as an entrepreneur, where my story could be very similar to hundreds of thousands of entrepreneurs out there. How do you prioritize your health? Like, what are the steps you can take when you feel like you're behind the 8 ball and maybe things are a little bit out of control? Your business is where you need it, but everything else might be slipping, or vice versa. How do you prioritize?
I think two things can be very important here. And one is remembering your why and focusing on that purpose. So why am I doing this? Is it for my family? Is it for the legacy I want to leave? Whatever that thing is, that's different for everybody, because life happens. And as you said, we can wake up every day with the best of intentions, but we get derailed, and that's going to happen. So accepting that it's progress over perfection and not holding ourselves to an impossible standard, but knowing that even in the midst of that chaos, if you have a target and you have something to aim for, a true north for a compass heading, whatever metaphor you want to use, you've got something to strive towards or strive for. And I think that's very helpful. And a lot of people, I'm surprised to how many people don't actually have that. They just go, oh, well, this much passive income sounds great, or, this much of an equity multiple on an exit sounds great, or rolling up this many businesses. I mean, those are all metrics, but that's not the big target. That's not the why. And taking that a step further, thinking about, what kind of life do you want? I mean, income and numbers and all that are great, but, if you're just killing yourself to go make, 7 or 8 or however many figures, I mean, pick a number, right? I mean, is that really worth it? So just being intentional about your time and your day and your why. And in so doing, anytime like when we started Transcend Health, or when I got out of the Navy, anytime I've had a big career shift in my life, I've taken out, I've done this on my phone, I guess. It's been a phone note, but you can take out a piece of paper, whatever your favorite, do it on your computer. But you've got 24 hours in a day and map out your priorities. And so for me, I know I need at least 7.5 hours of sleep. 7 to 9 for most people is pretty standard. For me, it's at least 7.5, but call it 8, just right in the middle. 8 hours of sleep, boom, there's 8 hours of my day. I know that most days I'm not going to sacrifice physical activity because it's important to me. It's important to my performance. So I leave 2 hours for that. Just get to and from the gym, stretch, warm up, lift, run, cardio, whatever, right? So there's 10 hours. And you go through that time with my family or time with my wife. I mean, it's non-negotiable. We have to sit down and at least have a meal together, have intentional time together, and you go through your day like that and reverse engineer your priorities in your day and your life. And what do you want that to look like? Whether it's T-ball coaching, or got to go get my daughter from the bus stop, even if it's raining, or whatever the thing is, right? Write all that down. And then you've got a schedule, you've got priorities, you've got a schedule to follow. Because if you wake up and the barrage of emails comes in and all the demands show up, and you're not time blocking and working in an appropriate fashion, you're gonna react to everything, and that stress is gonna mount, and those connections to the amygdala are gonna grow, and you just get sucked along, and days become weeks become months, and before you know it, you're on this health spiral and out of control, and your business and your life, and it's so much easier than that. It just takes the intentionality of setting that up and being mindful of it, and then reassessing it, whether that's once a month, once a quarter, whatever your priority is. If you've just moved and you're in the middle of unboxing things, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's been a crazy month over here, but it sounds almost as easy as pull out your calendar, wherever it is, whether it's paper, digital, whatever, and literally mark down the time and the days that you're going to go to the gym or go on a long walk or go on a run, whatever it is. And is that, it sounds like that's literally step number one, is just write it down. And then step number two is stick to it, right?
Yes.
Okay. So as we go beyond that, as you start getting into a deeper level, let's say, and I think you mentioned already, starting small, like just maybe if you've been in a health funk for months now, just schedule a 30-minute walk, right? Something super easy. You can do it, right? And then maybe a couple weeks later, schedule 30 minutes or an hour at the gym. Start breaking in those weights, right? Getting jacked, and just keep moving, right?
Yes. So I have these fairly elaborate protocols that I write for people, and well, they're general protocols that have kind of all the interventions, and then there's, again, for one-on-one clients, I have a very tailored approach where I list all these different lifestyle interventions out for people. And what I tell everybody is, you can't think about doing all of this at once. I mean, it's the data are clear on that. You can't. I mean, you're going to fail if you try to implement too much at once or change. So if you pick, to your point, Brien, if you pick one thing and you make it intentional, you put it on the calendar, you stick with it, and you do it, the neatest thing happens, because once you start adhering to, say, that 30-minute walk, and you start feeling better, you go, man, movement feels so good, because again, we're designed to move. And this does not have to be, again, 30 minutes at a 6-minute mile pace or some insanity like you're training for, the marathon or the Olympics or whatever. I mean, this literally could be something as simple as, I don't even have a chair in my office. I have a standing desk. So I'm standing at my desk and I have an underdesk treadmill, and you just turn that on while you're getting work done. You could do that for 30 minutes. I mean, it's just easy, but being intentional about it. And once that starts, and once you start to rewire your brain, you start to feel better. You get the endorphins, you get the dopamine, maybe a little bit of weight comes off. You're starting to feel better. Your back pain is getting better. You go, man, that's pretty good. And you can add the next thing, and you go, all right, maybe it's prioritizing my sleep, and you're intentional about the 8 hours, and you wake up every day and you're more refreshed, and you're moving and you're sleeping better. Another month or two goes by, and you're like, wow, I feel great. And then, I mean, just one thing at a time. And before you know it, you have this positive snowball of just feeling the best you've ever felt. And it really is that easy.
Let's talk about sleep in entrepreneurship. I believe it because I've experienced 4 to 5 hours of sleep for extended times, and then I realized that if I don't get my 7.5, a minimum of 7, but 7.5, I'm not optimized. Let's talk about the role of sleep in being your highest performing self.
Yes. So sleep is non-negotiable, period. And again, when people say I'll sleep when I'm dead, I just like, that is it's nails on a chalkboard to me.
Mm-hmm.
But it begs the question, for the opportunity cost of literally a third of your day, right? I mean, of a 24-hour cycle, we're talking 8-ish hours for most people is gone. And when we think in terms of how many more meetings could we schedule, or how many more client follow-ups, or time to think or work on a product, which is why people tend to want to skip it, right? Why in the world would that be conserved? And the answer, the scientific answer, is that it's that important. It's that important for your brain and your body. Most animals sleep in some form, and it's again conserved through millions of years of evolution. And forget about entrepreneurship. I mean, what about if you were asleep and a natural disaster happened, or a predator came into your camp and a lion started chewing up people? I mean, this is a problem, right? But
Yeah.
it's been conserved because it's that fundamentally important. And sleep is the only time that your brain forms new memories. So you can't, no matter what you learn, you cannot consolidate the memory until you actually achieve quality sleep. It's the time when your body heals itself after exercise. So if you start going to the gym, walking, lifting weights, doing all the things we're talking about, your body doesn't fully undergo those reparative changes until you sleep. It helps maintain healthy blood pressure, healthy blood sugar. It helps reset your immune system and keep it healthy and functioning. It's the only time we grow and develop, when we're adolescents into adulthood. and a big one. I mean, this we were talking about Alzheimer's earlier offline here, but and this is actually a relatively recent discovery. This was 2012, I think. So I was even still in medical school, and this was actually showed up in a textbook for the first time. But there's this system in your brain called the glymphatic system. And most people have heard of lymph nodes, that get kind of swollen if you get sick or something like that. This is kind of the same thing, but in your brain. And it still blows my mind. This wasn't even discovered anatomically until fairly recently. But there's this natural fluid flow that takes place in your brain. And throughout the day, we all build up these toxic proteins and metabolites, and things just kind of gunk up your brain. And at night, this glymphatic system turns on and it washes away the harmful stuff. Well, that only happens during sleep. And two of the proteins that accumulate, one's called beta amyloid, another one's called tau, over time, again, over decades, if these don't get cleared out and they accumulate, these are the pathological changes that cause Alzheimer's and lead to more neuroinflammation, lead to more brain inflammation, lead to premature aging of the brain and accelerated cell loss or neuronal cell death. So if you're not sleeping, you are actually accelerating. It's like putting the accelerator pedal down for Alzheimer's. So
Wow.
if there's no other reason, it's you don't want that in another 30 years.
Yeah. You say so. Okay, so that well, that hits the nail on the head right there. So get your sleep, avoid Alzheimer's. But and just on a daily basis, if I've had days where kids are up at night, whatever. I've got like stitched together 4 hours of sleep, and it's the next day is just a train wreck, right? And it's just gonna be that way until I get back to bed and get my actual sleep. Um, but what's, I guess I want to move towards now that we have the importance of sleep hammered out here. What are some of the tactics that entrepreneurs can do? We have a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs that listen to us, a lot of early stage entrepreneurs. And while I'm only 8 years into the game, that feels like a lot of years compared to someone who's just starting out. Um, whether it's, the budget isn't very high or you're just starting out, you're young and you don't have the coffers built up, you don't have the time to go out and, say dedicate 2 hours to the gym or to do all the things that we know are required to live that best life we can so that we're setting ourselves up for success late into life. What are like 5 things that we can do at home? Whether are they short burst types of things, but things that we're at least taking action towards the goal of living that healthy lifestyle. And at least to me, that would be something that I could see someone using as the building blocks towards, being able to better time block so that you can have longer at the gym and, let it snowball from there. So what would you say about the 5 or so things you can do at home to just get started and know you're taking action?
Sure. Yeah. So again, the time blocking and getting clear on your why, all those priorities, that's a great place to start and helps, I think, categorize some of these things. But another one that with sleep in particular and making sure that you're more alert in the daytime, higher performing, and then achieving better sleep would actually be to just step outside in the mornings. And while you're having your morning cup of coffee or whatever, if you want to go on a walk with the dogs, the family, as the sun's low in the sky. So right as it's still in the orange and red, kind of early, if you're depending on, I guess, geographically where you live. And if this is, if you're in a climate that has a lot of sunlight, I know it can be kind of gray and gloomy up your way for parts of the year. Um, so early morning light helps prime something called your circadian rhythm. And our brain works on this it's about a 24-hour clock. It's like 24 hours and 20 minutes or something. So it's a little longer, but case in point, it's responsive to light. And so when you set your circadian rhythm every morning by exposing yourself to light, you actually are telling your brain, hey, it's time to wake up, be alert, perform well, and you will have more energy and ability to focus throughout the day. And equally importantly, when it's nighttime, because again, it's a sort of diurnal or twice daily type rhythm, you'll actually achieve better sleep because your brain knows, hey, it's nighttime and it's time to go to sleep. So that's an easy pickup right there. Number one. Number two, when you're mapping out your day and your exercise, the data would suggest morning exercise is far superior to evening exercise. And there are a handful of reasons for that. But in general, you're turning on all these systems, you're stimulating blood flow to your brain, you're activating your muscles. And there's actually compelling data that intense exercise in the morning helps you achieve better quality deep sleep because, as I mentioned, that sleep is the time where your muscles and your body recover, and you're allowing for that to happen and actually promoting better sleep cycles and sleep patterns by getting that exercise in early. About a month ago, I believe it was in Nature, which is a big journal, but they compiled a bunch of data from Whoop users. So I use an Aura ring to track my sleep and health metrics. I have no relationship to Aura, but it's what I use. And some people have Whoop, Apple Watch, whatever. It doesn't matter. But anyway, they looked at, I want to say it was over 14,000 people, and it was over a million like 1.4 million sleep nights, and actually found that people that exercised within 4 hours of bed actually had impaired sleep.
Hmm.
So, which is interesting because when we look at all these metrics, like our body temperature dips a little bit overnight and our resting heart rate gets low. We have this thing called heart rate variability, which is how much our heart rate changes beat to beat, these are all independently correlated with longevity or how long we live. But those parameters are actually less optimal in people that exercise later in the day because of some of the stress and inflammation and time it takes for the body to kind of wind down. So, to my knowledge, there's been no comparison of evening versus not at all in terms of exercise. So I would say if afternoon or after you get off work, that's the only time you can get exercise in, the net positive might still be there. But for sure, if you have the choice of morning versus night, I would definitely opt for the morning personally. That's another big, easy one you can take advantage of. Back to that circadian rhythm. So similar to light in the morning being helpful, avoiding screens for the last hour or two of the day or any kind of artificial light is equally helpful. Because again, just like we're looking at the computer screens, as we mentioned a minute ago, those blue and green frequency light waves make their way rather into the retina, and they end up a few different places. But one of the places that actually shuts off or blocks is the pineal gland, and our pineal gland is what produces melatonin, which helps us fall asleep. But that only happens in a dark environment. So if you are like many people that I talk to and they're trying to wind down, they're scrolling on Instagram or X or Facebook or pick an app, and they're beaming bright light into their eyes, you are literally telling your brain it's like 12 o'clock, midday or whatever. Like it's not bedtime to your brain, and that's a horrible way to try to fall asleep or relax. So I try to tell people, just create a wind down routine. So, lower the air temperature indoors. 65 degrees is optimal for most people, but if you're in warmer climates, that may be tougher to do depending on how well insulated your house is. But, turn the lights low, get the air cool, turn the TV off, just relax. You actually don't want to eat within about 3 to 4 hours before bedtime either. That can be another very helpful thing to do because you actually activate your gut and you're actively digesting food for at least a period of several hours before you sleep. So that can impair your sleep cycle. Another fan favorite, people like to have their nightcap. Alcohol is horribly disruptive to sleep. So we can skip this because I know this is a whole like podcast in of itself if we went down this rabbit hole. But there's no proven medical benefit of alcohol, period. And I'm not being preachy. That's just what the data says. It's neurotoxic and has all kinds of issues. And again, it's very popular in our culture. So people have to make a choice. But if you choose to drink, I would certainly recommend no more than a drink a day. And even that has long-term health implications with back to thinning that gray matter in the cortex through autopsy studies that we've had, but also interrupts sleep. So don't think that you can have a drink and get quality sleep. You will not. And actually, if you wear a health tracker, it's fascinating. You can watch what happens in your body to your heart rate variability and all these parameters. It's interesting to see. So,
Wow.
I don't know if that was 5, but that was a few anyway.
Yeah, no, that was a great handful. And then is there so the physical things, like there are times I'll be at my computer and I've got just a laundry list of things that need to happen, right? And let's say I either didn't get to the gym in the morning or I had to do a haphazard workout, right? I think a lot of people can relate to this. I try to do just squats at my desk, like if I need a 5-minute break. Are these small incremental things, are they worthwhile? I mean, I guess it's easy to say like at least it's something, but is that advisable to just any chance you get do some sort of something?
So I'm so glad you brought this up, Brien. So this is a perfect example. There's something called exercise snacks, which I don't know if that's where you picked this up or you just started doing this on your own.
I think I read that in Dan Go or something.
Yeah, so there actually people have studied this. So there are these things called exercise snacks, which are very very short duration but high intensity exercise. So air squats, jumping jacks, mountain climbers, high knees, something that really gets your heart rate up. They've studied this for people that do this 2 minutes, 3 times a day. So we're talking a total investment of 6 minutes. And if you do not have 6 minutes in your day, then you really need to sit down and break out the sheet and look at your priorities and structure all that stuff out. 6 minutes a day, and especially if they're centered around meals. And this is actually interesting, especially for somebody that needs help regulating blood sugar. So this actually helps pull your average blood glucose down, number one. But number two, this lowers all cause mortality or the risk of dying of anything by about 40%
Wow.
for 6 minutes a day. So yes, if you have no time or it's just too stressful or it's hard to overcome the inertia and get going, if you started with that, I mean that's as good a place as any, in my opinion.
All right. That's yeah, because I'd heard that somewhere, and I didn't realize it was studied and that it makes that big of a difference. So, but I think that, like you said, if you don't have 6 minutes, then you gotta go back to the drawing board. I think we all have 6 minutes if we admit, the 5 minute break we take to get on XYZ app. How about we do some squats instead of getting on the app, right? Or hell, get on the app and do some squats. I don't care, right?
Sure.
Just
Yeah,
just
you can.
stay active.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
All right. Wow. Okay. Ryan, we could go for hours on this. There's so much to unpack here. Maybe we'll have to have you back for not a nightcap, but a part two. Um, and we'll keep diving into this because mindset is such an important thing for entrepreneurs. I know on my journey, I've learned so much more about it from getting to meet awesome people like you and learn about all the scientific things about the old melon in our head here. So, look, I know we both got to get moving here. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. But I also want to make sure anybody out there listening, what's a great way to either work with you, get in contact with you, or learn more from you?
Yes, and it's been a pleasure, Brian. So thank you so much for having me on, and we can definitely do round two, not nightcap. I'm up for that anytime.
Yeah, you bet.
Our website is transcendhealthgroup.com. So that's an easy place to go, transcendhealthgroup.com. That'll get you. We've got a newsletter that we send out that I try to post free content as often as I'm able. My book, The Incredible Brain, is coming out this September. So I'm finishing that up. Very excited about that. We talk about a lot that we covered today and a whole bunch more. If people want to reach out about private coaching or small group coaching, we've got both of those offers. So that's all on the website if people come there. And then if you just want to follow along, I try to post some hospital videos and just fun health tips on Instagram. So that's at Dr. Ryan Williamson. It's at dr.ryanwilliamson or at Transcend Health Group. Those are probably the best resources for people.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Ryan, this has been a absolute pleasure. We've learned a lot today, and thank you again for your time and knowledge. It's been fantastic.
Thanks, Brian.
All right.